Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our weekly Parsha Shiur. Special welcome to our loyal, consistent Parsha students who join us every week for this Shiur. Thank you, of course, for being with us. This week we have an incredible Parsha. The Jewish people, it's a real pivoting Parsha. It's the one in which the Jewish people actually leave Mitzrayim. Everything that happened until now was a build-up to this point. Everything that happens after this in the Torah is all the repercussions, is all the effect of this. But the moment of Yetzias Mitzrayim, where everything changes, happens in this week's Parsha, in Parsha Shiur Bo. It's interesting. I'm not sure why people don't make a bigger deal out of this. In that sense, it really is the most significant, the most important, the Parsha in the Torah, the biggest game-changing Parsha is really this week. I don't know why more of a fuss isn't made out of the fact that it all happens in Parsha Shiur Bo, but anyways, here it is. Most of the Parsha is spent talking about what happened in the lead-up, right before the Jewish people actually left. The instructions they were given, the mitzvahs, of course, that they were given, the mitzvahs of Korban Pesach, the mitzvahs of Milah, all the rest of it. And the final makas are in this week's parsha, the makkah of the makkah of locusts, the makkah of darkness, and eventually makas b'chayros. All of the action, really, of the parsha takes place within the last couple of days or weeks, right before the Jewish people leave. I'd like to learn with you today a very interesting Rashi and phenomenon, and something that becomes really a central theme in the Torah. The Torah comes back to this idea again and again when it comes to Yetzias Mitzrayim. If you have a Chumash in front of you, follow along with me. I'm going to read 2 psukim and 1 Rashi in the beginning of Perek Yud. Perek Yud, Pasuk Aleph, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe. Hashem says to Moshe, Oid nega echad. There's one more affliction. So again, we're holding at this part in the parsha. We're holding after the plague of darkness. So Hashem says to Moshe, there's only going to be one more plague. Oid nega echad. Only one more plague. Ovi al Parai, I will bring upon Parai al Mitzrayim and on Egypt. Achrei chen, Hashem says, and after this plague, you'll see. It's going to be over. Yishalach eschem mizeh. This time, Parai is going to send you out. When he sends you, he's going to chase you out, and he's going to chase you out completely. The Torah is saying this. One of the simple explanations for the Torah's words here is that until now, there's been so much negotiation going on between Hashem and Moshe. Right? If we leave, are the adults going to leave? Are the children going to leave? Are the animals going to leave? Etc., etc. So Hashem says to Moshe, at this point, there's going to be one more plague, and afterwards, Paro is going to send you. And when he sends you, he's going to send you out completely. It's going to be everybody and everyone and everything. Pasuk Beis, Daber no ba'oznei ha'am. Hashem says to Moshe, please speak into the ears of the people. V'yishalu ish me'es re'ehu. And each Jewish man should borrow from his Egyptian friend. V'isha me'es rusa, and each woman should borrow from her Egyptian friend. Klei kesef u'klei zahav, vessels of silver and vessels of gold. And so that's exactly what happened. The Torah goes on to say that the Jewish people, in preparation, in anticipation for going out of Mitzrayim, they went to their Egyptian, the Torah calls them Re'im, friends, colleagues, acquaintances. They went to these Egyptians and they borrowed from them their silver and their golden vessels. All right, the Medrash says very famously that this was done bedafka after the plague of darkness, because Hashem and the Jews anticipated that the Egyptians would try to conceal, they would try to be deceitful and lie about what it is that they owned. And so during the plague of darkness, the Jewish people went and scouted out all the Egyptian homes, and they knew exactly where they kept their silver and their gold and their money. So when they knocked on the door and they told the Egyptians that they were there to borrow their gold and silver, if the Egyptians tried to deny it, the Jewish people had, they had inventory. They knew what every Egyptian owned. They knew exactly where each Egyptian kept it. And they said, don't lie to me. I know what you have and I know where it is, etc., etc. And the Jewish people left Mitzrayim with all of this Egyptian wealth that they had borrowed from the Egyptians before they left. Now, to be clear, with all of the excitement of the Jewish people leaving Mitzrayim, and with all of the 10 plagues that eventually Hashem brings upon Paro and the Egyptians, and with all the humiliation that is involved on the Egyptians' end upon the exodus of the Jewish people, and with all the pride that the Jewish people experienced in leaving Mitzrayim, at no point is there anywhere stated where the Jewish people tell the Egyptians that we're leaving Egypt for good. There is no mention made of that anywhere. In fact, the entire discussion is all about the Jewish people going on a 3-day journey to offer sacrifices and daven to Hashem. And officially on paper, the plan was that when this 3-day journey is over, the Jewish people would do whatever it is that they do, offer sacrifices and daven to Hashem, and they would come right back and continue being slaves in Egypt exactly as they were. Which is absolutely amazing, because when you think about it, because at this point it seems after 10 plagues, Paro is brought down to his knees. He's afraid for his own life. You would think the Jewish people could have asked him for anything, like, let us finally go. That's not even discussed. It's not even brought up once. The entire discussion, the purpose of the 10 plagues was just to get Paro to agree to let the Jewish people go on a 3-day journey so they could daven and offer sacrifices to Hashem, and they come back. And then the agreement was that the Jews would come back. Next week in Parsha Shiur, when after 7 days the Jewish people in fact don't come back, we read that Paro chases the Jews to bring them back because they're violating the agreement. But be it as it may, the agreement and the deal is that the Jewish people would return to Egypt 6 or 7 days later. For this reason, when the Jews take these silver and golden vessels from the Egyptians, they make absolutely no mention of the fact that they're not planning to return it. The Torah says explicitly, V'yishalu, that they should borrow it. They should borrow it, each man from his friend and each woman from her friend. Again, the idea being that when they come back to Mitzrayim, they would return these objects. What was the point? If you're just going on a 3-day journey and then you're coming right back, so why do you need to take all these golden vessels, these golden and silver vessels with you? What's the point? Who borrows things from people when you're going on a 3-day journey and then coming back? Fakert, when you go on a 3-day journey and then come back, you take as little as possible with you. And in fact, even the things that you have, you ask other people, right? The commentaries make this observation. They say it's the opposite of human nature. If I'm going on a 3-day journey, right, and you live next door to me, so what's human nature? I knock on your door before I go and I say, listen, do me a favor. I'm going out of town for a week. Watch my golden vessels, watch my silver vessels. I want to make sure they don't get stolen. So the people who are, when people go on a journey, they give their own treasures to the people who are not traveling with them to watch for them until they come back. And here it's the other way around. The people who are going on the journey are borrowing the vessels from the people who are not going and saying, give them to us, we're going on a journey. So what's the seichel? So again, the simple explanation is that they said, look, we need these vessels in order to perform our service of Hashem. But we'll be back, and when we come back, we will return them. Of course, the end of the story is that the Jewish people don't come back. They don't ever come back. And later on, very famously, in the days of Alexander the Great, the Gemara relates very famously that the descendants of the Egyptians brought the Jews to court. They sued the Jews in the presence of Alexander the Great. And they said, Alexander, the Jews borrowed all of these golden and silver vessels when they left Egypt. They said they were going to bring it back, and they never brought it back. We want our gold and silver back. Alexander felt, the Gemara says, Alexander the Great felt they had a legitimate argument. Alexander called upon the Jews to defend themselves. All right, it's a langamaisa. It's a long story. It's not for today. But the end of the story is that the Jews defended themselves and says, they said, what are you talking about? We worked for 210 years as slaves for the Egyptians. We never got paid for that. You want to make a cheshbon? Let's make a cheshbon. So they made a cheshbon, and it turns out the Egyptians owed them much more money. And the Gemara says that the Egyptians, and Alexander went to the Egyptians and says, now you owe them money. The Gemara says the Egyptians ran away. Again, we've studied the story in the past. It's not for today. But my point, the point I'm making for now is that the reason why the Egyptians came back to Alexander with this complaint is because when the Jews left Egypt, the stated intent was that they were borrowing these vessels. In the words of the Torah, each man borrowed from his friend, and each woman borrowed from her friend. Okay. Before we dissect, one Rashi. On Pasuk Beis, Daber no. Rashi says, quotes from the Pasuk, Hashem says to Moshe, please speak to the Jews. Please. Ein no, says Rashi, ela loshen bakosha. The word no is an expression of bakosha, please. Hashem was pleading with Moshe Rabbeinu to make sure that the Jews would retrieve these gold and silver vessels. Now, this is very difficult to understand. Why? Why is it difficult to understand? Because, again, the assumption here is that although the Jews don't say anything, but the Jews know that they're not coming back to Egypt. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu has told them, it's the end. Again, this is never communicated to the Egyptians, but it's communicated to the Jews. The Jews know that it's over. So why is it so difficult to convince the Jews to take gold and silver with them when they're leaving? If the Jews thought they were coming back, so then, yeah, it's giving you good luck convincing Jews to schlep gold and silver vessels with them for a 3-day journey when they know they're coming back. But the Jews know they're not coming back. The Jews know they're not coming back. So what's this business with no? Why? No means please, right? Hashem is pleading with Moshe Rabbeinu, please insist, tell the Jews, beg them that they should take the Egyptian wealth with them. Since when do you have to beg with a Jew to get wealthy? To take the wealth of the Egyptians with them? Why do you have to beg? Explains Rashi, B'vakosha mimcha hizhira malkach. Hashem says to Moshe, Rashi says, Hashem said to Moshe, I'm begging of you, please warn the Jews about this. Make sure they don't leave Egypt without the Egyptian wealth. Hashem is very concerned. What's he concerned about? Shelo yoymar oisoi tzaddik Avrohom. Hashem says, I'm afraid if the Jews leave without wealth, Avrohom Avinu is going to have a complaint against me. Avram is going to say to me, says Hashem, you see, says Rashi, this entire part of Jewish history, the fact that the Jewish people are enslaved in Egypt and eventually redeemed from Egypt, and when they're redeemed with great wealth, all of this had already been promised by Hashem to Avrohom Avinu at the Bris Bein Absorim, at the covenant between the pieces, hundreds of years beforehand, 400 plus, 430 years ago. Hashem had told this to Avrohom Avinu already. And when Hashem told us to Avrohom Avinu, he says, you know what's going to happen? The Jews are going to be enslaved. They're going to be subjugated in a foreign land for 400 years, and then they'll be redeemed. And when they'll be redeemed with great wealth. So Hashem says to Moshe, if the Jewish people leave without the wealth, then Avrohom Avinu is going to come to me, Hashem, with a complaint and say, Hashem, you only fulfilled half your promise. You subjugated the Jews, you enslaved them, and you even released them, you redeemed them, but you didn't fulfill your promise of redeeming them with great wealth. So Hashem says to Moshe, please, I don't want complaints from Avrohom Avinu that I didn't fulfill half my promise. I didn't fulfill the promise of the Jews leaving with great wealth. If the Jews leave without the wealth, Avrohom Avinu is going to be upset with me. I don't want that, says Hashem. So do me a favor, please. Please speak to the people. Make sure before they leave Egypt, they take the gold and the silver so that we have no issues later. End of Rashi. Okay. We've discussed this Rashi before, but we got to talk about it again. What in heavens? Let's dissect here. Let's analyze a couple of questions. Number one, what in heaven's name is this business with the 3-day journey? The Jewish people, Moshe Rabbeinu, keep asking Paro and the Egyptians, please let us go on a 3-day journey. We'll offer sacrifices to Hashem and then we'll come back. This request never changes. Again, the Jews know that it's a Baba Maisa, but on a formal level, no other request is ever made of the Egyptians. And this is like wildly bizarre. I mean, think about what type of beating, what type of humiliation, what kind of destruction the 10 plagues have brought upon the Egyptians. To the point that Paro himself in the middle of Makas B'choros wakes up in the middle of the night and he runs around in the street looking for Moshe and Aaron, begging them to please leave Egypt. Literally throwing them out. No, so at that point, the Jews couldn't tell Paro, you know something? We've changed our minds. We've decided there are better places for us to live, greener pastures. We'd like to move on. No? 3-day journey? Why? I mean, after you deliver such a crushing blow to the economy of Egypt, to the infrastructure of Egypt, to the army of Egypt, I mean, there was a civil war that broke out between the Egyptians right before Makas B'choros. The Medrash says so many of them died. You couldn't tell the Egyptians, by the way, you remember, a year ago when we told you we want to go for 3 days? We changed our minds. Paro wouldn't let them go. Paro would say, no, stay in Egypt. His own life was in danger. That's question number one. Question number two, did anybody really think when they went to the Egyptians and borrowed their gold and silver that they were going to return it? Doesn't make any sense. Who takes gold and silver on a 3-day journey just to come back with it? Yes, the commentaries say that the Jews told them it's necessary to serve Hashem. But they emptied out the entire country. They made it, the Talmud says, they made it like a net without fish, like a storehouse without grain. They emptied out the entire wealth of Egypt. Did somebody actually believe that it was for a 3-day journey? What's this obsession with 3 days? Shloshis yomim. And the chutzpah, when they don't come back, right? 6 days later, 7 days later, when 3-day journey, Paro says, what's going on? We had an agreement. They don't come back. I'm going to go chase them. They took our money, the Medrash says. Paro told the Egyptians, they took our money. They took our wealth. They're supposed to return it. They're not coming back. A chutzpah. Really? They were expecting the Jews back. They wanted more. Very difficult to understand. And we talk with great pride, right? That Paro was so humiliated and Paro was so crushed and broken that eventually he was afraid for his life. He went and he found Moshe and Aaron. He threw him out of Mitzrayim. He told all the Jews, get out. Turns out that's not what he said. He said, get out for 3 days and then come back. Like a UN negotiation going on here. And then Rashi says, Hashem tells Moshe, it's very important to me that the Jewish people take the Egyptian wealth out of Egypt together with them, Because if they don't, Avrohom Avinu is going to be upset with me for not fulfilling my promise. Wait a second. If Hashem promised that the Jewish people would leave with Egyptian wealth, then Hashem has to make sure that the Jews leave Egypt with Egyptian wealth. What's the difference if Avrohom Avinu will be upset or won't be upset? Hashem has to keep his word because Hashem has to keep his word. Avrohom Avinu will be upset. What do you mean Avrohom Avinu will be upset? Avrohom Avinu will be right. And what's Avrohom Avinu going to say? You fulfilled the first half of the promise, but you didn't fulfill the second half of the promise. Even if Hashem didn't fulfill the first half of the promise, he still has to fulfill the second half of the promise. You fulfilled this, you didn't fulfill that. It's like Avrohom Avinu is trying to highlight Hashem's hypocrisy. And Hashem is uncomfortable with it. I don't want my hypocrisy exposed, right? So please, make sure the Jews take Egyptian wealth. And then we got the biggest question of them all. 1 second. Something's very wrong here. Hashem is pleading with the Jews that they should take the Egyptian wealth with them. Okay. What if, for whatever reason, the Jews wouldn't fulfill this? The Jews say, we're not interested. We're too busy baking matzah. Right? We got to go. We're too busy making charoises. For figuring out the right recipe for charoises. Besides, maybe the Jews would say, what are we going to do with all the stuff in the desert anyways? Right? All right, one day they would build a mishkan. But how much can you use for a mishkan already? The mishkan wasn't that big. So what if the Jews would have looked at each other and said, you know something? We're running around borrowing and arguing with Egyptians and taking all sorts of stuff from borrowing all sorts of, if you tell them a story that we're going to return it, we don't want to lie. We don't want to say we're going to return it. And then in a couple of 100 years from now, we're going to have to face a Din with Alexander. What if the Jews would say, we're not interested in Egyptian wealth. There's nothing we can do with it in the desert. You know how much wealth the Jewish people, the Medrash says every Jew left with 90 donkeys laden with the Egyptian wealth. They didn't have a clue what they were going to do with all of it. Even to this day, it's not clear where did all that wealth go. So if the Jews would not have gone through with it, it seems from the Pesukim and from Rashi that they would have left without the Egyptian wealth. And Hashem's promise would not have been fulfilled. So this is unbelievably ridiculous to understand. Whose responsibility is it to make sure that Hashem fulfills his promise? Whose responsibility is it to make sure that when the Jewish people leave, they leave as wealthy men? The Jews' responsibility or Hashem's responsibility? It's Hashem's responsibility. So imagine I come to you one day and I say, do me a favor, run around the whole neighborhood, borrow things from everybody, tell them a story that isn't true, tell them you're going to return it, and go during the plague of darkness and look and see where everybody's keeping their wealth so that you can fulfill this. Why? So that I shouldn't look like a liar when somebody else says to me, why didn't you do what you were supposed to do? So you take care of it for me. Why is it the Jews' responsibility to run around and borrow wealth from the Egyptians in order for Hashem to fulfill his promise? If Hashem promised that Hashem is going to make the Jewish people wealthy, then it's Hashem's responsibility to make the Jewish people wealthy. Moshe should have turned to Hashem like he did so many times before and so many times after and said, Rebbeinu Shalom, you promised the Jews wealth? Give them wealth. You promised Avrohom Avinu that his descendants would leave B'rechush Gadol? Give them Rechush Gadol. What do you want from the Jews? And think about how much goes into this, and this becomes this point of the Jewish people leaving with Egyptian wealth becomes an obsession in the Torah. First, they went to look for it during the plague of darkness, which they needed to do completely miraculously, because the Egyptians are all in the dark, and the Jews are walking around, in the Egyptians' home with light, and they take stock. But they don't take the wealth. Then they leave. The plague of darkness is over. The Jewish people are getting ready to leave. They come back to the Egyptians, knock on the door, tell them, lend us your gold and silver. The Egyptians say, we don't have any. The Jewish people say, no, you do, and they tell them where it is. And the Egyptians have to go reluctantly and lend it to the Jews. And then hundreds, thousands of years later, the Jews have to defend themselves in court over this. Also that, Rashi says, Avrohom Avinu shouldn't complain against Hashem that Hashem didn't fulfill the second half of his promise, even though he fulfilled the first half of his promise. This is hair-raisingly difficult to understand. So what is going on here? All right. Let's start, Taka, in order to understand this. Somebody's asking, didn't the Jews find precious gems on the ground after crossing the Yam Suf? In fact, Moshe had to pull them away so that they could continue on their journey. That's 100% correct. In next week's Parsha, we're going to read that there was more wealth at the sea than there was in Mitzrayim. There was more wealth at the sea than there was in Mitzrayim. I actually was not planning to bring that up, but I'm glad you mentioned it. It seems, and I actually don't have a source for what I'm about to say. So if I am wrong, I'm apologizing in advance. But it seems that the wealth that the Jewish people collected at the sea was not relevant to this conversation. I'll tell you why. Because the promise Hashem made to Avrohom Avinu at the Bris Bein Absorim was that the Jewish people would leave Egypt with great wealth. Right? Hashem said, the Jewish people will be subjugated and forced into servitude for 400 years. Then the nation that will subjugate them will put them into servitude, will be judged. And then Yetzu, they'll leave, the Jewish people will leave this land with great wealth. So the wealth that they accumulated 7 days later, this is the way I understand, wasn't helpful for this promise. The promise was that the Jews would leave with wealth. So Hashem said, please, I need you to take the Egyptian gold and silver together with you when you leave Mitzrayim, so that I can say that I fulfilled my promise that the Jewish people leave with wealth. Later on, they became wealthy. Yes, very wealthy, even wealthier. Yeah, and you're right what you're saying. Moshe Rabbeinu had to pull them away, which is also difficult to understand, right? If they already had so much wealth, why was it so difficult to pull them away? Again, there was nothing to do with all of this wealth. It's an amazing thing. They were in the desert. For food, they ate manna from heaven. They drank water from a rock. There was nothing to do with all this wealth. To this day, it's not even 100% clear where it all went. But what we're learning here, that the Jewish people borrowed stuff from the Egyptians before they left Mitzrayim, what we're learning here is that in order for Hashem to fulfill the promise, that the Jewish people leave with great wealth. So they had to like hold it in their hands, so to speak, as they walked out of Egypt. But it's a very acute observation. Okay. Let's go back here to this business of 3 days, because I think that this 3 days business, the key to what's going on here lies in this business, 3 days. Actually, we find another place in the Parsha where the issue of 3 days comes up. Where is that? The Jewish people are commanded by Hashem on the 10th of Nisan to take a sheep and to sacrifice it on the 14th. 3 full days. All right, technically it's 4 days, because if you include the day of the instruction, but it's 3 full days in between. So the Medrash says, why? If they're not going to sacrifice it till the 14th, why do they have to collect it on the 10th? All right, the simple explanation is because this was going to be a korban, a sacrifice, and the sacrifice has to be, without blemishes. So the Jewish people needed to inspect the animal that they had chosen to make sure it had no blemish, and so they brought it into their homes 3 days earlier. to make sure, to check it for 3 days to make sure it had no blemish. Okay, no mum, it's called. But obviously it doesn't take 3, I mean, how long does it take to check an animal to make sure it has no mum? It takes 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It doesn't take 3 days. And yet the Torah instructed that 3 days beforehand, they had to bring the animal into their home and tie it to their bedposts, right? And leave it there. Now I want to ask you a question. Right? Those of you who are married, we have predominantly women in this shiur. Those of you who are married, imagine your husband comes home one day after a long day of work, right? He's hot and tired, and he's bringing home a sheep. Oh, very nice. What's this? This is going to be dinner for us and, maybe the extended family. Oh, very nice. When are we going to eat this? In 3 or 4 days from now. Azoi, Zeir Shem. And where are you going to keep the sheep for the next 3 or 4 days? Oh, for the next 3 or 4 days, I'm tying the sheep to your bed. I'm tying the sheep to your bed. I don't know how many of you have ever had the opportunity to take care of a sheep. I certainly haven't. But sheep need to eat. Sheep need to relieve themselves. They make noise. I don't know the level of hygiene that these animals were possessed when they brought them into the house. What kind of a mitzvah is this? To bring the sheep into the house. Imagine, right? Like the American dream, right? The American dream, a white picketed fence, 1.5 children, and, a dog or something like that. So I mean, the mitzvah was they had to bring the sheep into the home, and it's got to live there for 3 days. Which balabusta, who wants to volunteer here on the shiur? Which balabusta wants a sheep in the house for 3 days? All right, a mitzvah. Who's there, Hashem? If it's a mitzvah, go put it outside in the sukkah. What are you bringing a sheep into my bedroom? What kind of a mitzvah is that? I'm laughing because my grandmother, Zalzan Gesund, absolutely loves the story about the guy who complains to the rabbi that his house is too small, right? Oh, Rebbe, my house is too small. And the Rebbe says, the house is too small. What do you do for a living? He says, I'm a farmer. Oh, Mustama, you have goats and chickens and sheep and cows. Yeah. Bring them all. Bring them all into the house. All right, you all know the story. After a couple of days, he gets rid of them, and the house has never felt so quiet and so big. But anyways, here you have it. It's biblical. Bring the sheep or the goat or whatever it was they were using for the Korban Pesach into the house and sits there for 3 or 4 days. And for 3 or 4 days, they have to examine it and make sure it has no mum. It's unbelievable. So the explanation is very famous. The explanation is very well known. The explanation is that the sheep was the object of Avodah Zarah. They worshipped it. They worshipped it in Mitzrayim, and in many places in the world still do. The Egyptians worshipped it. And after the Jews were in Mitzrayim for so many years, the Jews worshipped it as well. It was the object of Avodah Zarah, in the Avodah Zarah of choice in Mitzrayim. That was, of course, the great Mesiras Nefesh of the Jews, to sacrifice this as the Korban Pesach for the sake of Hashem in Egypt, right? That was the great Mesiras Nefesh that the Jewish people had. Okay, why 3 days? So again, very well known. The Medrash says we learn from the Chumash that 3 days. That 3 days is a test to see whether a person when a person does something in haste or in a moment of rashness. If we want to make sure that a person is not acting in a moment of haste, not acting without thinking, we stall the person for 3 days. It's an incredibly powerful human insight. Right? A person, you can even apply this to yourself. A person wants to make a decision, right? I get inspired, I get excited, I get motivated, whatever, and I want to commit to something. Very wise. You tell yourself, something? Wait 3 days. 3 days, 72 hours. 7 do full hours. The mind cannot remain in a state of temporary insanity, so to speak, for that long. At some point, the mind will snap and go, oh my God, what am I doing? This is crazy, and walk away from it. You can work a person up to a frenzy. You can get a person excited in a positive way, or God forbid, in a negative way, to do something, to commit to something, to engage in something, right? The person at the time, while they get wrapped up in it, they can lose their sense of judgment. They can do stuff that later on they'll regret. But you cannot hold a person there for 3 days. That's too long. At some point during the 3 days, the person will go, wait a second, what am I doing? And they'll, in Yiddish, it's called, that means the mind has this ability to go, wait a second, what am I doing? This is nuts, and kind of snap out of it. But you got to give yourself at least a little bit of time. What's the minimum amount of time? 3 days. Where do we see, by the way, what's the source? There's a pasuk in Chumash, this, what I'm saying. What's the source for this? We learned this, by the way, from the Akedah, where the Torah says that Hashem made Avrohom and Yitzchak travel to the site of the Akedah for 3 days. Why 3 days? Rashi writes this. Why 3 days? 3 days because Hashem wanted to prove that Avrohom Avinu was ready to sacrifice his son Yitzchak on the Akedah was not a moment of, it was not a decision made in a moment of a lapse of judgment. It wasn't like Hashem came to him and said, do this, and Avrohom Avinu said yes, and off he went and he did it. No. It wasn't that. If it was that, we could say Avrohom Avinu had a moment of Mesiras Nefesh. Which Jew doesn't have a moment of Mesiras Nefesh? Every Jew has a moment of Mesiras Nefesh. So Hashem put Avrohom and Yitzchak on a donkey, and he made them travel for 3 days. And for 3 days, they didn't waver from their commitment. And Hashem says, there it is. Now I know they're serious. If you can hold on to this mindset for 3 days, that means it's real. It's not some form of temporary ecstasy or some type of psychological trip that you're on that will disappear as soon as reality hits. 3 days is the minimum amount of time for a sense of reality, for a new sense of reality to set in. Hashem comes to the Jewish people in Mitzrayim and says, listen, my dear friends, my chosen people, I want you to sacrifice the God of the Egyptians. That which you, the Jewish people, have been worshiping, the Avodah Zorah that you, because of being in Mitzrayim for so long, have engaged in. I want you to take it, I want you to sacrifice it as a korban to me, Hashem, and I want you to put its blood on the doorposts. And then, and only then, am I going to take you out of Mitzrayim. But before you do so, Hashem says, I want you to take this sheep, put it in your home, tie it to your doorposts, and sit there and examine it for 3 days. What do you think was going on in every Jewish tent, in every Jewish home, throughout the land, throughout all of Egypt for those 3 days? Every Jew sat with his family, with his wife and with his children, and they said to them, it's time to sacrifice the Egyptian God. It's time to sacrifice everything we've been worshiping for the past 210 years and offer it up as a korban to Hashem. And then we'll be free. Not just because Hashem will remove us from Egypt, not just because Hashem will change our geographic location, but because we'll be free. We'll have stood up to the Egyptians. We'll have stood up to ourselves. We'll have taken that which we ourselves have worshipped until now. So to speak, physically, literally, and metaphorically, the God of the Egyptians, and shechted it as a korban to Hashem. We will have sacrificed it as an offering up to Hashem. And that they did. They brought it into their homes, and for 3 days, they sat there and they examined this animal to make sure it had no blemishes. Again, it doesn't take 3 days to examine an animal. So what were they looking for in this animal for 3 days? It wasn't physical blemishes they were looking for. They were looking for spiritual blemishes. They were examining their own hearts. They were examining their own souls. They were examining themselves to make sure that there are no blemishes. They're not holding themselves back when they offer up this animal to Hashem and say, Hashem, here, take it. And this they did. And then, of course, that sets them free. And they become Hashem's chosen people. They become Hashem's free people. But there's one more part to this. There's one more part to this. The Jews had to be able to face the Egyptians before they left Mitzrayim. They had to be able to face the Egyptians, first of all, by taking the sheep in front of the Egyptians. Second of all, by putting the blood of this on the doorposts. And even more so, by going to every Egyptian, knocking on the door, and telling them, hey, Mr. Egyptian, hey, Mrs. Egyptian, we're borrowing your gold and your silver, and we're taking it on a 3-day journey. They had to be able to look at the Egyptians and say this. Now that, my dear friends, is the hard part. You see, any of us, anybody who's experienced, a person who loyal has experienced being abused by another human being. There's 2 types of freedom. There's one where you can run away and be free. There's one where you can run away and be free, right? The Jewish people took the sacrifice, the animal, they took it into their homes, they closed the door. In the privacy of their own homes, they said, yes, we're sacrificing the God of the Egyptians to the God of Avrohom, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and now we're free. And yes, of course, that was the beginning. Without that, there was nothing to work with. But in order to really make this work, the Jewish people are going to have a conversation with the Egyptians. They're going to have to talk to them. They're going to have to begin their experience as being a free people in the presence of the Mitzrayim. They're going to have to tell them, we're leaving Mitzrayim. That the Jews were not ready for. To stand up to an Egyptian and say, I'm going to be free, I'm leaving and I'm never coming back. To have that conversation with the Egyptians, the Jews were too afraid, the Jews were too intimidated, the abuse, the suffering that they had gone through for 210 years, the Jewish people couldn't do it. They couldn't stand up to their own oppressors that way. They didn't have it within them. Again, to run, to flee, to take the korban into your own home, right? And in even by the way, even the blood that they put on the doorposts, many people don't realize this. Even the blood of the animal that they put on the doorposts, they put it in such a way that it was only visible from the inside, not from the outside. You know this? The pasuk says in this week's parsha, "V'hoya hadam lochem lo'os." Rashi says, "Lochem v'loy la'acherim." It was only indoors. In the privacy of a Jewish home, yes, they took the avodah zarah of the Egyptians and they sacrificed it up to Hashem. But you know what the Torah says? I dare say, that's the easy part of being free. Not that it's easy, it's incredibly difficult. But even that is easy compared to having to face an Egyptian. And for that, the Jews were not ready. They couldn't do it. Even after 10 plagues, the Jew couldn't look at an Egyptian and say, you don't own me ever again, I'm leaving and I'm never coming back. The challenge here wasn't on behalf of the Jews. It wasn't that the Egyptians couldn't take it, wouldn't have been able to handle it. The Egyptians were getting beat from right and from left. The Jews weren't ready to say it. They were still in fear. One of my favorite medrashim in next week's Parsha, by the story of Kriyas Yamsuf, says that Hashem made the Yamsuf spit out, produce, eject the corpses of the Egyptians that had drowned in the sea at the feet of the Jews. Vayar Yisrael es Mitzrayim meisal sfas hayam. The Jews saw the Egyptians dead, even though they drowned in the water. The water miraculously spat him out and put him at the feet of the Jews. And only then they said Shira. You know why? Because until they saw the Egyptian corpses lying on the floor, even though they were dead at the bottom of the sea, the Jews were afraid the Egyptians were coming to chase them. They said, Kishem she'onu oila mitzad zeh, just like we came out of the water on this side, the Egyptians are coming out mitzad achar on a different side, and maybe they're going to come chase us. That means they were still afraid of the Egyptians, even after the Egyptians were dead, lying in a watery grave at the bottom of the sea, and the Jews are still afraid. We're surprised that the Jews are still afraid after 10 plagues. The Jews are still afraid after it's finished. There's nobody even to be afraid of, and the Jews are still afraid. They saw the corpses of the Egyptians, Meisal, Sfasayam, dead at their feet. Then they sang Shira to Hashem. Only then. Now let's go back to Rashi. Rashi says, Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, please beg the Jews to take the wealth of the Egyptians with them. Otherwise, Avrohom Avinu is going to be upset. I didn't fulfill my promise that the Jews should leave with great wealth. I'll tell you what I think is going on here. What does it mean that the Jewish people will leave with great wealth? What does it mean that Jewish people will leave with great wealth? Not just that they should have the wealth. Some people have lots of money. But psychologically and emotionally, they're very poor people. The Gemara's expression is, Ein oni ela badas, Ein osher ela badas. Wealth and poverty, in addition to it in a literal sense, is also a psychological experience. It wasn't just the money that the Jewish people had to leave Egypt with. Practically, it wasn't just that Hashem wanted them to have the money. Hashem wanted them to feel a sense of ownership over it. The question here wasn't whether the Jewish people were going to leave rich or poor. Of course the Jewish people were going to leave rich. Hashem said that, of course the Jewish people were going to leave with the money. Hashem promised it. Hashem was going to fulfill his promise either way. Hashem wanted the Jews to feel rich, not just be rich. Hashem wanted the Jews to see themselves as rich people, not poor people carrying somebody else's money out of a land. Hashem wanted them to see and to feel that this was truly theirs. Hashem says, I know what's going to happen. Or I'm afraid of what's going to happen. When the Jewish people leave Egypt, you know what's going to happen? Hashem says, Avrohom Avinu is going to come running to me and say, wait a second, Hashem. The Jewish people were enslaved for 210 years. After 210 years, they feel like slaves. The time has come for you to release them with great wealth. Do they feel wealthy? Have they absorbed the wealth? They've absorbed the message that they were slaves, but now have they absorbed the message that the money is theirs? Or do they feel like they're leaving with someone else's money? Again, the question here wasn't whether Hashem would technically fulfill his promise. Of course, the promise is going to be fulfilled. Hashem could have given them all the money of the Egyptians. It wasn't the issue. The issue was Hashem says, Avrohom's going to come to me. Avrohom cares about the Jews. Avrohom Avinu is going to say to me, Hashem, Vavodim ve'inu oisam kiyam bohem. You didn't just enslave them. You made them slaves. Kiyam, you fulfilled it in them. The slavery was absorbed deep in their souls. Now the wealth has to be absorbed deep in their souls. Hashem says the only way to do that is for the Jews to stand up and claim their wealth from the Egyptians. But the Jews are not ready for that. They're not ready to face the Egyptians. It's going to take hundreds of years till Alexander the Great for the Jewish people to stand up and say, this wealth is ours, it belongs to us. And even in the times of Alexander the Great, when the Jewish people are challenged in this way, the Jews are still fumbling and having a hard time justifying the fact that they have the money. The Gemara says a hunchback named Gvir ben Psisa defended the Jews in the days of Alexander and told Alexander and the Jews and the Egyptians, what in heaven's name is going on here? Hundreds of years we're still having the same conversation. The Jewish people deserve the money. The Jewish people deserve the money. Says Avrohom Avinu to the Eibishter, you have to make sure that the Jewish people learn to own this wealth. They need to leave Egypt, not just as slaves, but as people who deserve, who feel rich, who are rich in body, rich in soul, rich physically, spiritually, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, in every way. The Jews are not ready for that. So Hashem tells the Jews, okay, you're not ready for it now. We're going to set it into motion. Go to the Egyptians and tell them you need to borrow their gold and their silver for a 3-day journey. Back to that. Why 3 days? Because hopefully this experience of 3 days will allow the new reality, will be enough time for the new reality to sink in. For you to start realizing, for you as the Jew to start realizing that this wealth really is truly yours and that you don't owe anything to the Egyptians. No matter how many times we talk about the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, it always comes back, and no matter which angle we approach it from, it always comes back to the same essential point, which is that the day the Jewish people left Egypt, and as we're discussing today, with the Egyptian wealth, that was the day the Jews were charged. They were mandated. They were instructed. They were entrusted. They were empowered by Hashem for the rest of Jewish history to see themselves for who they are, the Hashem's chosen nation and the purpose of all of existence. In the words of the Medrash, why did God even create gold in the first place? Why does it even exist? It exists so that it could be used in the Beis HaMikdash. Hashem says to the Jews, Avrohom Avinu is standing in heaven and making sure that we conduct this in a way that you, the Jews, absorb the message. You marinate. If all you can get out of your mouth is the words 3 days, then let's start with 3 days. 3 days is the beginning of absorbing it, marinating any idea for 3 days. It starts to have a true impact on you. The gold is yours. The silver is yours. It was created for you. You worked for it. There's a divine purpose for why you need it. The Jew says, I'm not ready to face the world and say that. Hashem says, okay, at least, please. Hashem is begging with Moshe Rabbeinu, please, please. At least, the Jews should stand up in front of the Egyptian and say, give it to me for 3 days. 3 days there, 3 days back. I need it to serve Hashem. All permissible things in this world have a godly purpose for why they were created. It waits merely for a Jew to stand up and use it for the right purpose and for the right reason. Even the Egyptians, the Torah says, develop a respect for Moshe Rabbeinu. They can see this is a man of God. Eventually, the Egyptians, according to the Gemara, eventually the Egyptians acknowledge the Jewish people's ownership over this. But only when the Jews are ready to stand up and say it's ours. Amazingly, we find this throughout all of Jewish history. That there are times when the Jewish people, for their own inferiority, complex reasons, have a hard time standing up to the world and claiming what is ours. To say that we own this, to say that Hashem gave this to us, to say it's ours, it always was and it always will be. We have a hard time with this sometimes. As they did when they left Mitzrayim. But remember this, my dear friends, every journey, they say every journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. But in the context of this parsha, every mindset, every journey of in this case, liberating the Jewish people, it begins with a journey of 3 days. If you can take the God of the Egyptians into your home, and after 3 days, if you can sacrifice it to Hashem, you're on your way to being free. And if you can stare the abusers and the oppressors in the face, and you can say, if you can at least say, give me 3 days, then 3 days becomes the beginning of real change. May Hashem bless us all with a wonderful Shabbos and a wonderful Chodesh. We should be blessed for many years to come. And please God, with Hashem's help, since since Hashem fulfilled the first half of his promise, and Jewish history has seen so much slavery and servitude. It's time for the real of Achrei Chen Yetzer B'chush Gadol Kiyam B'hem. It's time for the Jews to once and for all truly not just be liberated and not just be wealthy and not just be well off, but to feel it and to appreciate it and to absorb it and to remember who we are and to stand up and to face the world and say it with strength and pride. Have a wonderful Shabbos.